If someone asked you right now whether Christians are required to keep the Sabbath, what would you say? Most people give one of two answers. Either yes, the fourth commandment is still binding, so you should be resting on Saturday. Or no, Jesus fulfilled the law so it doesn't apply anymore. Both answers feel incomplete. Both leave something on the table. And the reason they feel incomplete is that both are answering a question that is smaller than the actual question. The real question is not which day, the real question is which covenant. And once you see the covenant, you see what the Sabbath was always pointing toward, and the argument changes completely. Here is what we are going to do. We are going to go to the text, Genesis, Exodus, the Gospels, Paul, and Hebrews, and we are going to let the Bible answer this in the order it actually builds the argument. Not the order that fits a predetermined conclusion, the order the Bible gives it, because both wrong answers cost you something. If you are carrying Sabbath obligation that the New Testament did not place on you, you are under a burden that was lifted. And if you are dismissing the Sabbath entirely without understanding what it was, you are walking past something the Bible never stopped treating as significant. Before the Mosaic Law, before Israel, before Sinai, in Genesis 2, God rested on the seventh day. And here is the first thing most people miss about that rest. God was not tired. God does not get tired. He rested because the work was finished. The rest in Genesis 2 is not recovery. It is declaration. It is the announcement that everything that needed to be made had been made, and it was good. That detail is going to matter. Hold on to it. Hebrews 3 and 4 do get quoted in this debate, but usually not in the full argument Hebrews is actually making. When you see where Hebrews takes the Sabbath category, what it says that rest is, who it is for, and when it is entered, the argument stops being about a day of the week entirely. We will get there. But first, we need to see what the Sabbath actually was. The Sabbath was a sign, and signs are not the thing they point to, they are the pointer. In Exodus 20, God gives Israel the 10 commandments. The fourth commandment is this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and the rationale Moses gives is creation. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The commandment is rooted in Genesis 2. The pattern God set at creation becomes the pattern Israel is called to embody. And this is the strongest argument the Sabbatarian position has. If the Sabbath goes back to creation, before the Mosaic Law, before Israel, before Sinai, then it is not a ceremonial law given to one nation. It is a creation ordinance given to humanity. That argument deserves to be taken seriously. It is not a fringe position. It is the position of careful readers who are paying attention to the text. But here is what most people miss. 11 chapters later in Exodus, God says something about the Sabbath that changes the frame entirely. Exodus 31. God is speaking to Moses, and he says this: "You must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy." A sign between me and you. Not between God and humanity, between God and Israel. Whatever we conclude about the creation pattern in Genesis 2, Exodus 31 defines Sabbath observance under Sinai as a covenant sign between God and Israel specifically, a mark of a specific relationship between a specific God and a specific people. And God makes it explicit. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. That language is precise. The same kind of precision the New Testament is going to pick up and use, and there is one more thing to notice. The penalty for breaking the Sabbath was death, not shame, not a fine, not exclusion from a feast. Death, because breaking the covenant sign was not just rule-breaking, it was covenant-breaking. The Sabbath carried the weight of the entire Mosaic covenant on its back. That means the Sabbath was never just a rest day, it was Israel wearing the covenant on the calendar. Now look at Deuteronomy 5. Moses repeats the 10 commandments to the next generation. The fourth commandment is there, same command, but the rationale has shifted. In Exodus 20, the rationale was creation. In Deuteronomy 5, the rationale is Exodus. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out with a mighty hand. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Same commandment, two different rationales. Creation in Exodus, liberation in Deuteronomy. Both are true, both are in the text. Creation gave the Sabbath its pattern. Exodus gave it its covenant meaning. Christ will give it its fulfillment. Now we come to Paul. And Paul is not vague about this. Colossians 2:16 and 17. Therefore do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Shadow and substance. The Sabbath is a shadow. Christ is the substance. A shadow is cast by something real. The shadow is not the object. It is the outline of the object. And when the object arrives, you do not keep staring at the shadow. You look at what cast it. Now, the Sabbatarian response to Colossians 2 is important to hear. The argument is that Paul is referring to ceremonial Sabbaths, feast day Sabbaths, special observances, not the weekly seventh-day Sabbath that goes back to creation. It is a real argument. The word Sabbath in the Old Testament can refer to more than the weekly rest. But here is what that objection does not resolve. Paul's framework is shadow and substance, and the sequence matters. Festival, new moon, Sabbath, annual, monthly, weekly. That pattern makes it very difficult to limit Paul's words only to special feast day Sabbaths. He is describing the relationship between the entire category of Mosaic observance and the person of Christ. The question is not which Sabbaths Paul means. The question is what they were pointing toward. And Paul tells you the reality is found in Christ. Then go to Mark 2. Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields on the Sabbath. The Pharisees confront him. His disciples are picking grain. They are working on the Sabbath. Jesus responds with two sentences that reframe everything. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He does not abolish the Sabbath. He claims lordship over it. There is a difference. The one who owns a thing can determine how it is used, what it means, and what it points toward. Jesus is not standing outside the Sabbath telling his followers to ignore it. He is standing over it as its Lord and reorienting what it means. Which side of this debate were you on before you started watching? Tell me in the comments, and tell me if anything has shifted. Then go to Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, the most urgent theological question the early church ever faced. Gentiles are coming to faith in Jesus. Jewish believers are insisting they must keep the Mosaic law to be saved. The apostles and elders gather. They debate. James gives his ruling. And they write a letter to the Gentile churches listing what is required of them. No sexual immorality, no food sacrificed to idols, no blood, no meat of strangled animals. The Sabbath is not on the list. That is not an oversight. This council was specifically addressing the question of which Mosaic requirements applied to Gentile believers. The men writing this letter knew the 10 Commandments. They knew the fourth commandment, and they did not include Sabbath observance among the requirements for Gentile Christians. Someone may point to verse 21 and say, but Moses was read every Sabbath. True. But that explains the synagogue setting and the sensitivity of Jewish-Gentile fellowship in that moment. It does not place Sabbath observance in the apostolic requirements for Gentile believers. The debate keeps asking which day, but the New Testament keeps answering a different question entirely. Now we come to Hebrews. Hebrews 3 and 4 build an argument that most popular treatments of this debate pass over too quickly. And the reason it gets passed over is that it does not land where either side expects it to land. It is operating at a completely different level. The author of Hebrews makes this argument. God's people in the wilderness failed to enter his rest because of unbelief. But the rest was not canceled. The rest is still available. The writer quotes Psalm 95. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. A Sabbath rest for the people of God. Present tense. Still available. Still being entered. But then the author tells you what entering that rest means. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their own work, just as God did from his. Hebrews does not let the argument stop at a calendar day. It takes the Sabbath category and drives it deeper into the question of whether you have entered God's finished rest by faith, the ceasing from your own works. The moment you stop striving for what has already been accomplished and simply enter what is finished. The Sabbath was always pointing here. Not to a calendar obligation, to a completed work that you stop striving against and receive by faith. The debate has been about which day for 2,000 years, Saturday versus Sunday, which calendar, which tradition, which denomination got it right. But Hebrews is not interested in that question. Hebrews is asking whether you have stopped working for your own justification and entered the rest of the one who said the work is done. And now the detail from Genesis 2 pays off. God rested on the seventh day, not because he was tired, but because the work was finished. The rest was the declaration of completion. That is what the Sabbath carried from the very beginning. Not a day of recovery, a day that announced what needed to be done has been done. The Gospel writers present Jesus' burial in direct relation to the approaching Sabbath. The work is finished. The body is laid down. The Sabbath arrives. The one who claimed to be Lord of the Sabbath rested on the Sabbath after completing the work for which he came. The pattern from Genesis 2, rest as the declaration that the work is finished, was not erased at the cross. It was fulfilled there. The Sabbath was not treated by the New Testament as meaningless. It was fulfilled, and fulfillment does not mean the sign was worthless. It means the sign reached the thing it was pointing to. The shadow was always cast by something real. The sign was always pointing somewhere. The rest that Israel observed every seventh day was a weekly declaration made in advance. The work will be finished. The debt will be paid. The striving will end. Rest is coming. And when Jesus said it is finished, and rested in the tomb on the Sabbath, and walked out of it on the first day of the week, the sign had found its substance. The pointer had reached its destination. The Sabbath had arrived at the person it was always describing. You are not under the Mosaic Sabbath as a covenant sign. That covenant was given to Israel, and its sign was fulfilled in Christ. But you are invited into what the Sabbath was always pointing toward, the rest that comes not from performing a day, but from trusting the finished work of the one who is Lord of the Sabbath. So, what was the Sabbath always pointing toward? This, a finished work, a completed atonement, a rest that is entered not by keeping a day, but by trusting the one who kept the entire covenant on your behalf and then rested on the Sabbath because the work was done. The two answers most people give, keep Saturday or it doesn't apply anymore, are both reaching for something true and both stopping short of it. The Sabbath is not nothing. It never was, but it was always a sign, and signs are not the destination. They are the way of finding it. You are not someone caught between Saturday guilt and Sunday carelessness. You are someone who has been invited into the rest the Sabbath was always describing, not a day to perform, a person to trust. The Sabbath was not abolished, it was fulfilled. And there is a difference. And that difference is everything. If this video changed how you see the Sabbath, if the question of which day looks different now that you have seen which covenant, share this with someone in your church or Bible study who has been in this debate and never felt like either side fully answered it. This is the kind of biblical framework that changes how you read Exodus, Colossians, and Hebrews together. We have already gone deep on every covenant God made, every letter Paul wrote, every tribe of Israel, every feast of Israel, and why Isaiah's 66 chapters unlock the entire Bible. Every video connects, every thread runs somewhere. The Sabbath was not the destination, it was the arrow, and the arrow always pointed here. Subscribe, and we will keep going deeper.